fiction with from pen to paper, and I'm the author of 15 fantasy and science fiction books. And tonight I'll be talking about science fiction, writing science fiction. So it should be an interesting program tonight. And all the information I'm going to give you tonight, you can either copy and paste it. I'll post it later on because it's a lot to cover, and I probably won't go over all of it because some of it's just there's a lot of different things in it. So, anyways, let's get started. And first of all, there's two major types of science fiction. There's hard science fiction, and there's soft science fiction. And what hard science fiction is it really is based heavily on technology and science. So it does like extensive research on whatever subject the book entails, and is very factual and basis of the actual technology. Okay, and it must be feasible by today's current science, or at least in theory, it must be feasible. Okay, that's hard science fiction. And soft science fiction, and some examples of that. Hard science fiction would be like Gravity, The Martian, and 2001: Space Odyssey. They're all based heavily in science and technology. Okay, and Interstellar is another one. It's similar to that. Okay, but and some can be a combination of both of these. So you could have a little bit, but they're kind of like middle of the road. They're not really one or the other. So the next one is soft science fiction, and that's based loosely on science. It's usually more about the people than the technology, and its sociological aspects weaved within the story. So a lot of times it has to do more about the people and their problems and how they deal with the situation at hand, if it's a disaster, whatever it is. Some examples of that are like Arrival, The Gods Themselves from Isaac. I think it's Isaac Asimov that wrote that, and Star Wars. Okay, those are examples of based heavily on the characters and their interaction. Okay, and a lot of tonight's program, I'll be taking stuff out of this. It's Orson Scott Card, How to Write Science Fiction, and this is one book that I read when I first started writing, and it helped me 100%. It's a really good book. It's an older book, but it's a good one. And there are new books that are probably better than that one and been out for a while, and you can look around, but that one is a real good one. So okay, and so and within those two types of science fiction, there are several subdivisions, and I'm not going to go through the whole list of subdivisions, but I'll just tell you like some of them, like dystopian, end of the world books. That's one type of subdivision. Another one is futuristic, taking place in the future. Another one is like alien invasion, alternate history, parallel universes, kind of like what I do, and artificial intelligence, colonization, environmental disaster, first contact. I can go on and on. There's a lot of them. There's probably like 30 different types. Okay, and that's those are all the subdivisions. And I'll post these later, and you can decide which ones you want to use. When you're going to write. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the elements of science fiction. And a lot of the elements of science fiction are as follows. It must be realistic and fantastic details. So and within a story, you want the reader to visualize whatever world you're at as much as you can when you don't overdo the description, but make it so the person actually understands what the place looks like. they can see it with their own eyes through your words, and that's a good thing if you can do that, and that will help really enhance your fiction. Okay, and the next one is grounded in science. So I mean, a lot of science fiction books are grounded in science. They have to do with scientific methods. Even Frankenstein, which was considered a science fiction book many years ago. First, they considered it like horror, but then they considered it more science fiction. And even in that book, there were doctors at the time dabbling with that idea. I mean, didn't mean that they actually could do it, but they were trying to do it. And that's where a lot of those ideas come from in books and stuff like that. Okay, and another thing in science fiction is it's usually set in the future, but not necessarily. Sometimes it can be in the past and the present as well, with some kind of a future element or some kind of a thing that's out of the ordinary. Like Cowboys and Aliens is a good movie. You know, that's kind of like an old-fashioned thing with something new thrown into it, and that's kind of what that would be. You know, or it's in the past. Like there was another one about a time machine where he goes back in the past and or goes into the future. But we'll get into that later on. Unknown inventions. So usually in a science fiction thing, there might be like unknown devices that like time machines. We don't know how to build them yet, but they're in the story just the same. The theory, or traveling through wormholes, or faster than light travel, things like that. Okay, and then usually science fiction books make a serious comment about the world. So it makes basically something, you know, about the world that they're in. They're trying to make like a political statement or a human rights statement or something like that. Some kind of statement. The story would usually have something that has like a moral to it, like a children's book. Okay, and it's usually can be like a warning to mankind. That can do that sometimes. You know, okay, and then there's exploration, and that's an element where you were exploring something in space, or you're exploring something in the past, or exploring something in the future, whatever you're exploring. And then there's speculation, which is basically how you think things are going to turn out. You know, they may turn out good, they may turn out bad. How do you think things are going to turn out? You know, it's up to you as the author to decide that. Okay, and now we're going to talk about world creation. We have a lot to cover tonight, so it's going to try to be as quick as I can here. World creation, maps can be useful in science fiction. I mean, I have a galactic map myself of where most of my stories take place in this one galaxy, and you know, maps are fun. You can have a lot of fun with them. And galactic map, you can have galactic map would have like your you know, of course in a galaxy, every galactic map has a black hole somewhere, and you know, and you have stars that go around the galaxy if it's a spiral galaxy. Something like that, or maps of the world you're on, or the town, or the country, depending on, you know, what you're trying to convey in the story. In science fiction, the time and setting can be any time or anywhere, from Earth to some faraway galaxy in long ago, as they say. You know, sorry, I had an itch. So, yeah, so they can be anywhere. You can basically, in a science fiction story, you can basically have it anywhere. It can be Could be Earth, could be any planet, could be another universe, like my book. Um, and you make sure the rules of the world follow the rules of science. Like, you cannot breathe the air on Mars, but if you adapt a station there, you can inside of a station. So basically, you can't. There's no way you can break the rules of science. You can't live on Jupiter because it's just between the winds and the gaseous atmosphere and everything else, it would kill any normal human. So there's no way you could even think to colonize like Jupiter. Okay. And the next thing is rules of space flight. And a lot of this stuff, you're probably not going to remember tonight, but if you copy and paste when I post it later, then you can put it on your own Word file, and you'll have it, for the future. And a lot of this stuff is very important, later on. You're going to do the sci-fi stuff. Okay, so the rules of starflight are as follows, and we all know this one. E equals mc squared, basically. And what that means is energy equals mass times speed of light squared. Or anything that travels at the speed of light turns to pure energy. So you can't really go the speed of light without turning into energy, because the faster you go, and also the faster you go, the more mass you create, and it slows you down as well. So it does reduce you in the end anyways. So the next one is, without folding of space-time, you can only travel safely to 2/3 of the speed of light, providing the ship has the adequate machinery. So if you get to 2/3 of the speed of light, that's probably the best we're going to do, unless we find a way to create warp drive, which is something which I want to talk about next, which is to fold time. You need a negative energy field bubble around the ship. Warp drive pulls the space in front of it, of the craft, and pushes the space behind the craft. So it's basically like going like this. Okay? And that would do that. So, and it would push you through space. So you're not really moving. The space is moving you. It's you're creating a bubble that's pushing you. So, all right. And the next thing is creating a wormhole or using a black hole can cut travel time considerably. Hundreds of light years in seconds, considering it's feasible. Okay, so basically a wormhole is you fold the space and time like this, and you go through, and you're right here in seconds, because you basically got all this mileage away from you. Okay, so and some of you people probably already know this stuff. It's just the same thing over again. Okay, so and generational ships are more likely to transport humans to other stars in the future. So, you probably have, like, you'd take off from Earth, and then 40 years later, your kids would continue the journey, and 40 years later, their kids would continue the journey, and it would just go on and on and on until you got to the next star. And that's probably the way we would colonize, at this point, unless we come up with some radical idea in the next 200 years or so. Okay, so and these are also ideas you can use in books, and as long as you stay within the parameters of what you're talking about. Like the next one is about, like, some stories use tesseracts or doorways through spaces and time. Like the Princess of Mars used a doorway that he basically went through to get to Mars. And Doctor Who's the same way. They use basically a time device that takes them through another time and through. It's like a tesseract, like in Wrinkle of Time. They use a tesseract as well. Okay, and then you also have cryogenics, which is sometimes used, but to make the toll on the human body less tolerable, or more tolerable and and more feasible. So you would go, they would freeze you, you'd wake up 30 years later, and then you can pick up from there, and you'd be that much farther through space. But they would have to figure out a way to do that to lower. I think it's like 32 degrees or 34 degrees is as low as your heart, your your blood can get before it freezes. So they would have to keep a way to get it down to that and keep you alive somehow. But so far, that's still science fiction. So, and then there's time dilation, which is another factor in the rules of space flight, which is basically going the speed of light. You go 3 hours at the speed of light. 30 years are already passed on Earth. So, if you go like to the next star and back, things are completely different. It'd be a long time. At the speed of light, I don't know if that figure's right though. I don't know. I took it out of something, but I think that might be wrong. 30 years, 3 hours, 30 years. Depends how fast you're going. I mean, if you're going like 5 times the speed of light, I can see that. But I know if you went to Alpha Centauri at the speed of light, I think it would be like 40 years by the time you got back here. If you went there and back, it would be 6 years. And here, you would probably have aged could be even 60 years. But there is like a time dilation factor. So, okay, enough about that. Anyways. And then I've also included something in here, but I'm not going to read them all. It has to do with the life capability around stars, types, and spectrums. And I'll edit that when I put it online, so you can see it better. I'm gonna skip over that because it's very tedious, but it is good, useful information if you're developing a planet or something. Because it talks about the types and the atmospheres and stuff like that. So, and the next thing we're going to talk about is types of civilizations and propulsions. Okay, and basically what that talks about is type 1 of civilization are those that harness energy of an entire planet. And they use types of space travel. They would use like ionic or electromagnetic propulsion, which is kind of like what we do, and fission, which is the current method that we use. So they would use rocket fuels or ionic or electromagnetic propulsion, like I said. And it takes like, with the ionic one, it would take probably 3,000 years to travel 3 light years. And if you use the fission one, which is our current method, it would take 70,000 years to reach our nearest star. And that's a long time. We got to come a long way before we are going to be able to reach that nearest star. And the universe is a big place. It's really big. So, and type 2 civilization is it basically harnesses the energy of a star. So it uses like as much energy as a star does, and it's 10 billion times the energy of our sun. Okay. So and this type of civilization would create ramjet fusion drives, which are basically drives that go through space and scoop up what's in front of them, use it for fuel, and spit it out behind them. And that's basically what they're doing. There's no waste, there's no pollution of any kind. It's just other than radioactive material that they would have in there anyways, and stuff like that. So, and that usually would take like 3 years to reach 3 light years. It would take 40 years, or our years, to get there. So any kind of type of fusion drive would take us like 40 years to get to the nearest star. But that's a little bit more reasonable than the 70,000 for sure. Okay, and I need a little water. So I'm getting this hoarse. Okay. The next type is type 3 civilization, which harnesses the energy of a galaxy and uses 10 billion times energy of type 2. And usually these are like von Neumann probes, which are basically probes that go out throughout the galaxy at high rate of speed. And they take 20 years, it would take 20 years with those to reach the nearest star. Okay? And then there's Planck energy. Oh, antimatter drive is the next one, which can travel at the speed of light, and it would take like 3 years to get to the nearest star. And Planck energy, which is or wormhole travel, which is basically science fiction now. There's no way you can actually do that now. You could go faster than light, and you would actually be 3 light years instantaneously. So if you left here from Earth, you would be there like within seconds, with a wormhole. Okay. And we're considered a type 0 civilization because we haven't even achieved the first step of type 1. So basically, we haven't harnessed the energy of an entire planet. So we're still basically type 1. Even though we've created the propulsions we need, we're still unable to harness the energy of the planet, which is basically use the resources of the planet to harness all of our energy. Okay. So basically, that's that. Okay. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is rules of time travel. And, all right. I may have to go into 2 classes here. I may have to do a second class. Give me a second here. I know I'm not very organized tonight. Well, I'll try to get through as much as I can tonight, and then next week we'll have to finish up if I don't get it through. Okay? So, the next one is the rules of time travel. If you go back in time, anything you change in the past will alter the future and the outcome of others' lives as well. So, that's pretty much, you know what that means. It's basically if you go back in time, everything's going to change. And then traveling in time causes you not to exist because you are traveling outside the normal time stream. So you're not really there. Even though you're back in time, you're not really who you are because you don't exist in that time period. Okay? And if you go back far enough, changes won't have any major effect on your own time because time has an inertia that gets it back on track. So that's basically, if, something happens in your family a long time ago, it's not going to change what happened now because that was so long ago that the events had no effect on it, basically. And, then there's the grandfather effect or grandmother effect, however you want to put it, where you can't go back in time to kill your grandmother if she hasn't given birth to your father, or you will cease to exist. So if you kill your grandmother before your father was born, you're not going to be around. Okay, so that won't work. It is possible, however, to travel the future to assassinate your older self. That is possible. And as far as time travel rules go, let's put it that way. Not in real life, though. You cannot travel back in time to before your time machine exists. Okay, so if you have a time machine, you can't go back before it actually existed, or because there's nothing to receive you at the other end, or however that is. Like with Stargate, unless there's a Stargate on the planet they're going to, they aren't able to get to that planet. So basically, okay, and then there's the rules of magic, which basically say, unless you're writing a true fantasy story, stay away from using magic without a scientific explanation. And this can be explained with levitation, telekinesis, telepathy, any one of those things. I use a drug in my book that gives them telekinetic and telepathic powers. So, and that could be one way of doing it. Okay. I'm going to try to get a little bit more here done, and then we'll have to call it a night for tonight. Another thing you need to know is the history of your worlds, which is your governments, your languages, and your biography of your characters. So you need to know your characters past or present, what they've done, and to help their society, what they've done to hurt their society, things like that. And the language, if you're using a foreign language, you need to include that in the book so people understand what you're saying, unless you explain it. Governments usually are pretty self-explanatory. There's tyrannical governments, there's democratic governments, there's all kinds of governments. Okay, and then there's the scenery, and and with the scenery, you could have like your star systems. What star systems are from, what planets they're from. And in planets, you want to include the diameter of the planet, the mass of the planet, periods of rotation or revolution of the planet. These are all things you don't need to put them in the book, but you need to know what they are at that particular planet. Okay? Distance from the sun, inclination of angles, surface gravity, type of sun, type of moons, surface temperatures, type of atmosphere, climates, oceans, continents, and landscapes. Okay? And I think I'm going to stop there, and we'll talk about story construction, the process, and a few final thoughts I'll have for the science fiction thing. But I do want to go back to one more thing that I skipped. Where is it? Oh, I wanted to talk about warp travel for a minute. Warp drive. If you're doing a story with warp drive, there is a type of basic standard for warp drive. Warp 1 is 186,000 miles per second, and that is with the speed of light, basically. And that's what you're traveling at warp 1. You're traveling the speed of light. But it multiplies after that. Warp 2 is like 10 times the speed of light. Warp 3 is 39 times the speed of light. Warp 4 is 102 times the speed of light. And I'm gonna put all these on TV, so or on the Facebook, so you'll know what I'm talking about. But those all, that helps you with warp drive. It helps you understand a little better. So All right. One more thing before I go. I remember having this special here, running with my two coloring books for $8 and crayons, and it's a special deal of the month, and you can get them through my website at nicholas-t-davis-books.com. And I'll be posting this video onto YouTube later on, and that's Nicholas T. Davis Books with a capital N under Nicholas. And so next week I'll finish up the sci-fi class, and then we'll be talking about fantasy. So we'll be talking, which are very similar. So I mean, fantasy has a lot of things, same elements as sci-fi, and you can have kind of a mixture of both. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next week, and we'll see you then. Have a good night.